At 11:14 p.m. in a roadside bar outside Reno, Nevada, a 68-year-old man named Thomas walked in looking exhausted and desperate. His car had broken down 80 miles back. He'd hitchhiked to the bar hoping to find a phone. He needed to get to North Carolina, 400 miles away, and he needed to get there fast. His wife was dying, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The hospital had called 6 hours ago and said she had maybe 48 hours left. Thomas had 43 in his wallet, no credit cards, no way to rent a car or buy a plane ticket. A Hell's Angel named Wrench was at the bar playing pool. He noticed Thomas's 1,000-yard stare, the kind you only see in combat vets or people who've lost everything. "You okay, brother?" Thomas rolled up his sleeve without saying a word. There, faded but unmistakable, was the eagle, globe and anchor, the Marine Corps emblem. Below it, Key San 1968. Wrench didn't ask another question. He just pulled out his phone and made a call. 52 Hells Angels were about to turn a 400-mile journey into an honor escort. Thomas had met Margaret in 1969, 3 months after he came back from Vietnam. She was a nurse at the VA hospital, where he was recovering from shrapnel wounds in his leg and shoulder. She didn't look at him the way other people did, like he was broken or dangerous. She looked at him like he was still a man worth knowing. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at her parents' church in Asheville, North Carolina. 47 years together, 3 kids, 5 grandchildren, a lifetime of memories built on the foundation of her patience and his devotion, and now she was dying. The cancer had come fast and brutal. Diagnosed 4 months ago. By the time they caught it, it had already spread to her liver and lungs. The doctors gave her 6 months. She made it to 4. Thomas had been in Reno visiting their son, Michael, who worked as an engineer at a tech company. Margaret insisted he go. She didn't want him hovering over her hospital bed. She wanted him to live a little, to see their son, to remember there was still life outside the walls of hospice care. But the call came early. She was fading faster than anyone expected. Thomas grabbed his keys and ran to his truck. He made it 60 miles before the transmission gave out on Highway 50. Smoke poured from under the hood. He coasted to the shoulder and sat there for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. No cell service. No passing cars. Just desert and darkness. He started walking. 3 hours later, blistered feet and aching joints, he reached the bar, a squat building with a neon sign that read, "Lucky Strike Saloon." Inside, a handful of patrons sat scattered around the dim room. Country music played low on the jukebox. Thomas approached the bartender and asked to use the phone. The bartender, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, handed it over without question. Thomas called the hospital. A nurse told him Margaret was stable but unresponsive. She might have hours. She might have a day. There was no way to know. Thomas hung up and stared at the phone like it held answers he couldn't find. That's when Wrench noticed him. Wrench was 49 years old and had been riding with the Hells Angels for over 20 years. He'd seen a lot in that time. Broken men, desperate men, men at the end of their rope. Thomas had all the signs. Wrench walked over and offered to buy him a drink. Thomas shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I don't have time. I need to get to North Carolina. My wife," his voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. Wrench nodded. He understood grief. He understood loss. "Show me your ink," Wrench said quietly. Thomas hesitated, then rolled up his left sleeve. The tattoo was faded and stretched with age, but the emblem was unmistakable. Eagle, globe and anchor, and below it in block letters, Kasan 1968. Wrench knew that name. Kasan was one of the bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War, a 77-day siege where Marines held a combat base against overwhelming enemy forces. Thousands died. Those who survived carried scars that never fully healed. Wrench didn't say anything. He just pulled out his phone and dialed his club president, a man called Reaper. "We got a Marine here. Kasan vet. Wife's dying in North Carolina. Car broke down. He's got no way to get there." There was a pause. Then Reaper's voice came through, calm and decisive. "Where are you?" "Lucky Strike Saloon, Highway 50. Give me an hour." Within 45 minutes, motorcycles started arriving. First 3, then 7, then 15. By midnight, 52 Hells Angels were parked outside the Lucky Strike Saloon. They came from Reno, from Carson City, from Sparks and Fernley. Some rode an hour. Some rode 3. None of them asked why. They just came. Wrench walked Thomas outside. The old Marine stopped in his tracks when he saw the wall of motorcycles, chrome gleaming under the parking lot lights. Leather vests bearing the death head patch. 52 men and women standing in formation, engines idling like a war drum. Reaper stepped forward. He was a tall man with a grey beard and eyes that had seen too much. He extended his hand. "You served at Kasan." Thomas nodded, throat tight. "Then your family. We're getting you home." Thomas tried to speak but couldn't. Reaper continued. "We can't get you there in one shot, but we've got chapters across the country. We'll relay you. 800 miles at a time. You'll ride with us, and when we hit our limit, the next chapter takes over. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and into North Carolina. 72 hours non-stop." Thomas shook his head. "I can't ask you to do that. I don't even know you." Wrench stepped up beside him. "You don't have to ask. And you do know us. We're Marines, Army, Air Force. We're vets just like you. We take care of our own." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't cried since the day Margaret was diagnosed. But standing there in a parking lot in the middle of Nevada, surrounded by strangers who had just become brothers, he broke. Reaper gripped his shoulder. "Let's ride." They gave Thomas a leather jacket to wear over his flannel shirt. Someone found a spare helmet. They positioned him in the center of the convoy, surrounded on all sides by motorcycles. At 20:47 am, the convoy rolled out of the Lucky Strike Saloon parking lot and onto Highway 50 East, 52 motorcycles moving as one. The sound was deafening, a roar that echoed across the desert and into the night sky. Thomas had never ridden on a motorcycle before. He sat behind Wrench, gripping the handlebars with white knuckles, feeling the raw power of the engine beneath him. The wind tore at his face. The cold desert air bit into his skin, but he didn't care. For the first time in 6 hours, he felt like he was moving forward. They rode through the night across Nevada, endless stretches of highway cutting through barren desert. The convoy stayed tight, never letting Thomas out of sight. Every 2 hours they stopped at a gas station to refuel. At each stop, someone handed Thomas water, coffee, a sandwich. He tried to pay. They refused. "Save your money, brother." At dawn, they crossed into Arizona. The Reno chapter handed Thomas off to the Phoenix chapter. 34 Hells Angels waiting at a truck stop just outside Kingman. Reaper shook Thomas's hand. "You're in good hands. They'll get you to New Mexico." Thomas tried to thank him, but Reaper just nodded and rode off. The Phoenix chapter took over without missing a beat. By noon, they were deep into New Mexico. The landscape shifted from desert to high plains. The sun blazed overhead, relentless and unforgiving. Thomas's body ached, his legs cramped, his back screamed, but he didn't complain. He thought about Margaret, about the way she smiled when she was happy, the way she hummed old hymns while cooking dinner, the way she held his hand during thunderstorms because she knew he hated the sound, too much like artillery fire. He thought about the last thing she said to him before he left for Reno. "Don't rush back. I'll still be here." He'd kissed her forehead and promised he'd only be gone a week. That was 6 days ago. In Albuquerque, the New Mexico chapter handed him off to the Texas chapter. 41 Hells Angels. They rode through the night, headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Thomas dozed off once, his head nodding forward then snapping back up. The biker he was riding with, call sign Gunner, noticed and slowed down slightly, making the ride smoother. They stopped at a rest area at 3 am. Gunner handed Thomas a blanket. "Get some sleep. We'll wake you in an hour." Thomas laid down on a picnic table, the blanket pulled tight around him, and slept for 45 minutes. It was the deepest sleep he'd had in weeks. By dawn of the second day, they were in Louisiana. The air was thick and humid. The smell of swamps and wet earth replaced the dry desert scent. Thomas's phone buzzed. A text from his daughter, Emily. "Mum's still holding on. She knows you're coming. Hurry." Thomas showed the text to Gunner. Gunner nodded and throttled up. The convoy picked up speed. They blasted through Louisiana into Mississippi. The Mississippi chapter met them at a truck stop in Meridian. 28 Hells Angels, fresh and ready. The Texas chapter peeled off, exhausted but satisfied. The Mississippi riders took over. Through Mississippi and into Alabama, the convoy never slowed. They ran red lights with police escorts that appeared out of nowhere, off-duty cops who were also vets, who heard what was happening and wanted to help. In Birmingham, a state trooper stopped them, not to ticket them, to salute. He waved them through and radioed ahead to clear the road. In Georgia, the convoy swelled to 60 Hells Angels. Word had spread on social media. Riders who weren't even part of the original chapters showed up to help. They formed a protective ring around Thomas, an honor guard of leather and chrome. At 9:47 p.m. on the third night, they crossed into North Carolina. Thomas's heart pounded. He was close, so close. His daughter called. "Dad, where are you?" 30 miles out. She's awake. She's waiting. Thomas's hands shook. He could barely hold on. The convoy roared down Interstate 40 toward Asheville. 60 motorcycles, engines screaming, lights flashing. People pulled over to watch. Some filmed it. Some saluted. Some cried. At 10:52 p.m. they pulled into the hospital parking lot. Mission Memorial Hospital. The building was lit up against the night sky. Thomas climbed off the bike, legs trembling, barely able to stand. The Hells Angels formed 2 lines leading from the parking lot to the front entrance. An honor corridor. Thomas walked between them, tears streaming down his face. Inside, a nurse was waiting. She'd been told he was coming. She led him down the hallway to room 304, Margaret's room. Thomas stopped outside the door. His hand hovered over the handle. He was terrified. Terrified that he was too late. Terrified of what he would see. But he opened the door. Margaret was in bed, frail and pale, oxygen tube in her nose. But her eyes were open, and when she saw him she smiled. "You made it." Thomas crossed the room in 3 steps and took her hand. It was cold and thin, but it was hers. "I made it." She looked at him with the same eyes that had seen him through 47 years of life. "I knew you would." They sat together in silence. No words needed, just presence, just love. Outside, 60 Hells Angels stood in the parking lot, silent, waiting. They didn't leave until dawn. Margaret passed away peacefully 2 days later with Thomas holding her hand. At her funeral, 52 Hells Angels showed up in full colors. They stood on a guard at the graveside. When the service ended, they fired up their engines in unison, a final salute. Thomas stood there, surrounded by strangers who had become brothers, and he understood something he hadn't understood before. Brotherhood isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about carrying someone when they can't carry themselves. It's about honor. And 52 Hells Angels had shown him what that really meant. After the funeral, Thomas stayed in Asheville. The house felt empty without Margaret. Everything reminded him of her. The chair where she used to read. The garden she tended every spring. The coffee mug she always used. He wandered through the rooms like a ghost. His kids came by daily, trying to help, but grief is a solitary journey. One afternoon, 3 weeks after Margaret's death, Thomas heard motorcycles pull up outside his house. He looked out the window and saw Wrench and Reaper standing on his front porch. They'd ridden all the way from Nevada to check on him. "We wanted to see how you were doing," Wrench said. Thomas invited them in. They sat in the living room, drinking coffee, talking about Margaret, about the Marines, about life. Wrench told him about his own father, a Vietnam vet who never talked about the war. Reaper shared stories about brothers he'd lost, some to war, some to the road, some to the bottle. They didn't offer empty platitudes. They just listened. And Thomas talked. For the first time since Margaret died, he talked about Kassan, about the friends he lost there, about the nightmares that still woke him up at night, about the guilt of surviving when so many didn't, about how Margaret was the only person who ever made him feel like he deserved to be alive. Wrench and Reaper stayed for 2 days. They helped Thomas fix the porch railing that had been broken for months. They cleaned out the gutters. They mowed the lawn. Small things, but things that mattered. Before they left, Reaper handed Thomas a leather vest, a Hells Angels support vest. "Your family now. If you ever need anything, you call. Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter when." Thomas tried to refuse it, but Reaper wouldn't take no for an answer. "You earned this. Kassan earned this. Wear it with pride." Thomas started wearing the vest when he went out, to the grocery store, to the VA clinic, to the diner where he and Margaret used to have breakfast every Sunday. People stared. Some crossed the street, but other vets noticed, and they nodded. They understood. One day, at the VA hospital, a young Marine recently back from Afghanistan saw the vest and the tattoo. He stopped Thomas in the hallway. "Kassan?" Thomas nodded. "Thank you for your service, sir." The young Marine saluted. Thomas returned it, and for the first time in weeks he felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. 6 months later, Thomas got a call from Wrench. The Hells Angels were organizing a memorial ride for fallen vets. They wanted Thomas to lead it. He hesitated. He wasn't a biker. He'd only ever been on a motorcycle once, during that desperate ride to see Margaret. But Wrench insisted. "You don't have to ride. Just be there. These men and women need to see you. They need to see that the old guard is still standing." Thomas agreed. The memorial ride was held in Washington, D.C. Over 500 motorcycles gathered at the National Mall. Vets from every branch, every war. Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. They rode in formation from the mall to Arlington National Cemetery. Thomas rode in the lead vehicle, a sidecar attached to Reaper's bike. At Arlington, They held a ceremony, names were read, stories were shared. A bugler played taps. Thomas stood at attention, hand over his heart, tears streaming down his face. These were his brothers. Not by blood, not even by shared experience, but by something deeper, by sacrifice, by service, by the understanding that some things are worth fighting for. After the ceremony, a young woman approached him. She was in her 20s, wearing an army uniform. My grandfather served at Kasan. He never talked about it, but he had the same tattoo as you. She showed Thomas a photo on her phone. An old man in a hospital bed, thin and frail, his arm extended to show the eagle, globe, and anchor. He passed away last year, but before he died, he told me to thank any Kasan vet I ever met, so thank you. Thomas hugged her. He didn't know her grandfather, but he knew him. He knew every Marine who held that hill, every Marine who bled in that red dirt, every Marine who came home broken and tried to rebuild a life from the pieces. The ride back to North Carolina was quiet. Thomas sat in the sidecar, watching the landscape roll by, fields and forests, small towns and big cities. America, the country he fought for, the country Margaret loved, the country that had given him a second family when he thought he'd lost everything. When they reached Asheville, Reaper pulled up to Thomas's house. "You good, brother?" Thomas nodded. "I'm good." But before he went inside, he turned back. "Reaper, why did you do it? That night in Reno, why did you drop everything and ride 400 miles for a stranger?" Reaper took off his sunglasses and looked Thomas in the eye. "Because that's what brothers do. And because 50 years ago, someone did it for me." He didn't explain further. He just nodded, fired up his bike, and rode off into the night. Thomas stood on his porch, the leather vest heavy on his shoulders, and watched the taillights disappear. He thought about Margaret, about the life they built, about the love they shared, and he thought about the 52 Hells Angels who made sure he got to say goodbye. Some people believe in fate. Some believe in luck. Thomas believed in brotherhood, and that belief had carried him home.